Hello and welcome to week 10 in the psychology of personality. And this week we are examining two chapters. The first chapter is on Erik Erikson, and the second chapter is on Carl Jung, both of whom were very famous students, in fact, favored students of Sigmund Freud. Both of these characters had a rather complicated rupture in their relationship with Sigmund Freud and went their own way. Probably the more famous one in the West here certainly is Erik Erikson, and then we're going to talk about Carl Jung. Now, if you recall learning about Sigmund Freud's theory also encompassed a developmental theory that indicated stages of psychosexual development. Keeping in mind, although Freud gets a bad rap for this, what he meant from sexual development is the energy that would eventually be the energy that causes us to seek to reproduce. But he felt that that core energy was intrinsic and existential to an individual, and it drove the change of that individual through the oral stage, anal stage, phallic stage, and all of those things were the center of neurological growth, thus pleasure in the experience of sensation migrated through the body following the cephalocaudal course of development that happens across the body. In principle, Freud felt that personality was pretty much done by the time we reached adolescence into early adulthood. And in many respects, there's a lot of things that when they happen during that period of time tend to persist into adulthood. But one of the ways in which Erikson differed from Freud, his primary difference, is that he felt that human development continued to happen after adolescence. He also felt that the driving force was not the psyche dealing with the sexual movement of energy, but the psyche dealing with the social environment. You can see how progressive this was. Like an individual born into a society, as you come to know this class, I'm really big on culture and society. And along comes Erikson and gives us the psychosocial model of development. So let's take a look at his theory. It's a stage theory. This is not necessarily unfamiliar with people, but we have a number of stages. It starts off early on. We have trust versus mistrust. Essentially, the goal of the emerging psyche in the infant is to determine whether or not they live in a trustworthy environment or not. It's the first year of life. Is the environment responsive to when the child is cold, hot, hungry, wet, lonely, whatever? How responsive is the world? There's no such thing as spoiling an infant. We should try to be there for every beck and call. It's sort of the calling of parenthood. During this first year into the second year, we are basically slaves to our child. That's kind of the way it works. So let's take a look at the rest of these stages here. Early, early on, we see the terrible twos, maybe, where the child is beginning to want to do things on their own, and the environment needs to support that. Otherwise, they will develop some sense of shame and doubt. As we move on, we're seeing the preschool, 3, 4 years old. Similar to autonomy, what we have are preschools who take initiative. They want to do things on their own. They come up with ideas and they want to practice them. This is the child who tries to make you breakfast sometime with various degrees of success, and how chaotic that can be. So that's the terrible threes. Then they enter school, and really from this context, we see the first sort of uh, sanctified official social comparison. So Where do I rank in terms of how well do I interact with other people? What is my skill set like compared to other people? I get compared, so you get the sense of industry and inferiority. Move on to adolescence, sort of a corner or kind of a milestone in each one of these is a milestone, but a milestone in human development where all of these stages of development are building the foundation of an individual's identity. What are they trustworthy and worthy in the world? Are they autonomous? Are their ideas worth anything? And how do they fit in the social hierarchy? And that develops into a pretty solid sense of self that we call adolescence. Now, interestingly enough, in my adult development class, all my developmental classes, there is research going on where there may be another theory, there's another stage that we're going to put in between adolescence and young adulthood. I think young adulthood and this um, particular new stage is they kind of intermingle. But that stage, the name of which is escaping me right now, emerging adulthood. There we go. Emerging adulthood really talks about that kind of transition between adolescence and the gradual taking on of additional adult responsibilities, more so than what we get in young adulthood. Now, we put that in the context of Erikson's theory, and we see that that theory would be in between adolescence and that stage, I'm sorry, would be in between adolescence and young adulthood. Once we've established at least a good foothold into adulthood, at that point, we're ready for committed relationships, intimacy versus isolation. We then move on to middle adulthood, generativity versus stagnation. This is basically the longest stage. It's our adulthood where we do the things that we're going to do in life. And then we reach maturity and we have an integrity to ourselves, or alternatively, a sense of despair. Now, this particular theory really has a lot of personal meaning for me. It was one of the first developmental theories I encountered. I think there's evidence and there's history that this is a very, very profound piece of information in understanding human development. It is a very big part of my own theory that I'm working on in personality development or identity development called puzzle pieces. And this next theorist is kind of like the granularity of what we're looking at in Erikson's theory. Now, each one of these stages that Erikson talks about is made up of a multitude of pieces that are being constructed by the individual. So early in life, we're constructing issues of trust versus mistrust, but we're also identifying roles for mom, roles for dad, who am I in the family, how does this whole thing work, we move into autonomy, what can I do, what can I not do, initiative, into comparing my skill sets, and each one of these pieces come together over time to build in adolescence, by adolescence for the most part, this kind of sense of this initial identity that then continues developing throughout the lifespan. And that construction always struck me similar to a jigsaw puzzle. So each one of those pieces represents some aspect of our identity, and the construction, the creation of that jigsaw piece, and how it fits into all our other pieces, and how it fits into other people who interact with us and connect us to them, is the basis of that theory. Now, that process by which we go through constructing an individual piece is best described by the theory of identity status put forth by James Marcy, a Canadian psychologist just like myself. So let's take a look at James Marcy. Now, what this is, think of any one of those pieces. Think of your application for a part-time job. I'll use a really simple one, an application for a part-time job. Let's go through each one of these stages and see how that looks. So what we have in James Mercia's theory is two processes. One, on the vertical axis, we have the level of exploration, often referred to as crisis. Not an emotional crisis, but levels of exploration, meaning I'm looking at the options in terms of the construction of this piece. And then across the horizontal axis, we have measures of low and high commitment, meaning I'm chosen which one of those that I want. Now, when both are low, I haven't looked and I have no level of commitment, we have in the bottom left-hand quadrant here, identity diffusion, things that are on the back burner. If, however, I begin to look at the option, meaning I raise my level of exploration, I move into identity moratorium. Identity moratorium are the things that I am currently working on, shaping that piece. Diffusion, I'm not even thinking about it. There we have this idea of moratorium, looking at it. Then we see identity foreclosure. This is a degree to which there's a commitment to this piece of identity, but it did not involve too much choice. So it's foreclosed. And then finally, achieved identity. We have both a degree of exploration and choice and commitment. Now, when we think about this in this part-time job, let's say you entered the new school year, you weren't even thinking about getting a part-time job. Sign up for all your classes, and then you're looking and say, you know what? I'd like some extra money, or I need some extra money. So I'm going to start looking for a part-time job. So leading right up until that realization, your part-time job identity was in diffusion. Then it moved, because you're going to start looking for a part-time job, it moves into moratorium. You're looking around. Now let's just say that your family also happens to own a grocery store, small mom and pop grocery store. You're looking for a part-time job, and they're looking for employees, maybe really cheap employees like family members, right? So you may feel compelled, because you now have the time and the need for a part-time job, you may feel foreclosed and like, wow, they really expect me to go work at this family store. Maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I've been working there all my childhood and I'm tired of stocking shelves. I don't know. But you feel that kind of foreclosedness to it, like that. It's right in my hand. It's right there. I don't have to interview. I just have to start showing up and they'll start paying me. But yet I may not. Maybe I want to do something more related to the career I'm going into. So you might have a conflict going on between the fact that you're searching for a job, but you're already foreclosed into an existing part-time job. However you decide to resolve that, once you've examined the options of a third job or an external job, and weighed that against the foreclosed job, you decide, you make a decision, where am I going to go? You go to the family, say, I really don't want to do that kind of work right now, and have this opportunity to work part-time in a school district. I want to be a teacher someday, so I'm going to pick that. And you pick your job, and that little piece of identity that went through all those manipulations through that process becomes solidified. My new part-time job is I'm a teacher's aide at a local elementary school. Achieved identity. We can examine hundreds of aspects of our identity in this way. So that's essentially what this theory is all about. Now that brings us actually to the discussion and quiz associated with this chapter. So moving ahead in my slideshow here. So in the discussion, I want you to examine a single piece of your existence right now that fits each one of these. Now, these are different aspects of your identity, meaning what part of you is still in diffusion, what part of you is foreclosed, what part of you is in moratorium, and what part of you is in achieved identity. And we all have our identity is our pieces are in each one of those boxes. So we can examine a piece cannot be in two boxes at the same time. That's sort of the game rule here. Can't be in diffusion and foreclosure at the same time. Maybe maybe you're in foreclosure and the desire to look for another job is in diffusion. You're going to put that off, or see how that nuance can be. But if you're foreclosed in something, that's what it is right now. There's a level of commitment, even though you might not want it to be. Or maybe you want it to be. Going back to the example, you're looking for a part-time job and the family comes up to you and says, we would like to make you assistant manager. We're going to pay you $30K a year to work 10 hours a week. How about that? Rock on. There you go. I don't need another job. I'm getting a great deal at the family business, and you commit to doing that. So in the discussion, I want you to share ideas about different aspects of your identity that could be identified in each one of these stages, each one of these statuses. For the quiz, I'm actually going to have you review Erickson. Erickson's work looks at those stages. I want you to pick where are you at right now. You might have to do some research on that emerging adulthood part if you haven't heard about that yet. And describe how you made it through those other stages. Just an essay going over, what was the early life like that brought me to my current young adulthood status, and how well did I accomplish each one of those tasks that come along. Okay, that brings us actually to the next chapter of Carl Jung. Now, Carl Jung, being a student of Freud, I'm going to show you here a graphic. Here is a typical illustration of Freud's idea of the personality, that the ego is in the conscious level. The superego, we are aware of some of it, but not all of it, and the id is completely below our consciousness. Now, we often see this as an iceberg sitting in the ocean, and the analogy is you can see very little of an iceberg. Most of it is below the surface. And Freud thought about the personality the same way. That what we see in terms of someone's personality is only a small part of all this other stuff that's going on. Now, the way I began to think about the work of Carl Jung is, while many people focus on the iceberg, Carl Jung focused on the ocean. What is it floating in? What is this medium in which the iceberg is floating? And he drew the conclusion that maybe we're all floating in the same ocean. So even though we're not aware of those pieces of us, they're interacting with others who are floating in the same ocean. And there are, for lack of better, his archetypes and symbols of meaning and whatnot are the creatures and the qualities of the ocean and within the ocean that we're interacting with, and we're only aware of a little bit of it. And his research really focused on this notion of what he called a collective unconscious. It's the shared ocean that we're all floating in. He said that's where there was psychic energy that we share among every human being. There's a clear reference to opposites that he felt in all of his research, that a lot of our language and a lot of our philosophies, when we think about things like up, down, in, out, good, evil, yin, yang, all of these things, like these opposites, he felt that that was a very, very important quality of understanding human psychology. And finally, archetypes, these meanings that are found within the ocean that define aspects of our identity. Now, this is a part of a world of psychology called depth psychology. If you explore depth psychology, or it's a transpersonal psychology and those kinds of areas, it's a very spiritually based kind of theory. However, this idea of archetypes and this idea of opposites really caught the attention of a mother-daughter research team who developed a personality test based on Carl Jung's theory. And that personality test is, aside from the big five, is probably the most widely used personality test. Even though in recent years even, it's come under a lot of criticism, but even within that criticism, it is probably the most widely used test in business, counseling for relationships, and whatnot. And it's called the Myers-Briggs Type Inventory, the MBTI. I happen to be a licensed Myers-Briggs Type Indicator administrator. Took the training on all that, and looking at doing a little bit more of that. So that particular theory is a personality type. It's a constellations of personality traits that come together in patterns that create a type of individual. And I suspect many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs. You end up with 4 letters. I am a INTP or an ENTP. So I'm an extroverted, introverted, depending on what I'm doing, and is intuition. And T is a primarily thinking. And then on the end, I'm perceiving, and just kind of very loose in terms of my structure of how I approach the outside world. So let's look at a graphic on that. Here we have, now, describe mine. How I direct and receive information is sometimes extroverted, sometimes introverted. So that's where I am. You're either E or an I. How do I take in information? I gut level, big picture, as opposed to specific detail that we get in the sensing individual. How do you decide on things and come to a conclusion? I'm very much a logical thinker, even though I'm going on intuition. I don't let my feelings don't necessarily drive my decision making, although of course I take them into consideration. And finally, do I need a lot of structure in terms of perceiving the world and how I approach it, or am I pretty laid back in that, and I can, pretty much go from the hip, and that's my perceiving sense. So we have this test that arose out of kind of a very interesting theory that wasn't really driving toward a personality test in any way. So what we get from that, I mean, most of the time when people take the MBTI, there's a lot of research having to do with finding a fit with other people and finding a fit in your career. That's a very, very often used career test to look at personality and career. And because we're looking at career, there's another theory, and this is, I would say that this really is, as I continue to write my theory and puzzle pieces, this is going to become more and more prominent part of puzzle pieces. And that is the concept of happenstance. Happenstance is when we have a chance encounter of some kind, and it opens a door for us. You're that you're that person looking for a part-time job, and you're looking around, there's nothing there, and blah. And then you go and you're go to the Starbucks, and you're standing in line waiting for your triple cappuccino mocha vanilla swirl, whatever you're ordering, and you start chatting with the person next to you. And first, you start saying, I'm in college, I'm studying psychology, I'm thinking about going into that, but I really like to work with kids and stuff. And the person says, oh my God, I own a company, and we deal with teenagers that are living on the streets. Would you be interested in doing it? And you're like, I'd love to do that. And here's this, you get this conversation going, and pretty soon you find yourself doing that part-time. Opens up a whole new world for you and changes your career and everything. Like, I want to work with this population. You didn't Maybe you didn't even know what population you wanted to work with, and now you're going to work with kids that are living on the street because of this chance encounter. Now, the reason this theory has come to some prominence is because over the years, researchers have done extensive data collection on what are the factors that contribute to people being in the career of their dreams. And they found that there was an unusually large, meaning not by chance, statistically, an unusually large, like sometimes over 50% in a particular study, that the individual arrived at their job that they love, their career, their vocation, and the pinnacle moment was a chance encounter. So it became, and this connects to that collective unconscious, and maybe these connections are being made underneath our perception. Literally, Carl Jung talked about my deep consciousness being aware that that person who owns that company has my ideal job, and they worked it out beneath my consciousness that I'm going to want a coffee and I'm going to go to Starbucks at that time, and that person is going to want a coffee and go to Starbucks at that time, and they met. Happenstance. Carl Jung referred to it as synchronicity. When things happen that, what's the chance of that happening? Actually, in his work on synchronicity, you read about it, and it's a statistical analysis of what is the likelihood of this happening by chance, and astronomically unlikely for two people who were looking for each other in a way to meet. And he used that as a basis for his understanding and his description of these chance events. Now, because this moved into the area of career development, you find out like, wow, all this, plan your degree, go over this, what you need to get into that job and stuff. And then we're finding out, wow, half the people that get the job of their dreams didn't even know the job existed prior to that time. So how do you prepare, in the context of developing strategies to help people prepare for the future? How do you prepare for a chance event? And there are some tips. So here's some tips on that. We engender a curiosity for learning about just about anything, just a level of curiosity in anything. And I think because I'm a high openness to experience, because I have some of that uh, intuitive and extroverted pieces, I can pretty much listen to someone speak about anything. I can go to any event and engage in a question and answer with someone in a field I don't even understand. I'm just curious, have a deep level of curiosity built into me. I think many of you are like that as well. You persist when you come across obstacles. You have flexibility to address a variety of circumstances and events. You have optimism for the potential benefits of unplanned events. You have ongoing self-assessment. You use assessment and feedback from others to modify your behavior and your perceptions of yourself. You are very good at networking with people. You have a good work-life balance, and you plan well financially. So when that door opens, as you know, when you change job, there's a period of time in which you're not going to have any money coming in before the new job starts kicking in, and you'll have prepared for that by setting money aside. Now, individuals who pursued this kind of lifestyle, these values right here, have often been found to be extremely successful in being ready for the opportunities when the knock is on the door. There you go. So we come to our two discussions and an assignment. The first discussion has to do with balance in your life, one of those issues, but also relating to Carl Jung's balance of yin and yang and the duality of things, making sure let's have some discussion about that. The second discussion has to do with happenstance. It doesn't matter if it's your career or a chance meeting of the person who would be your partner or anything like that. How did chance encounters affect your life? And then finally, the assignment. I'm going to have you take a version of the Myers-Briggs type inventory and write a reflection on that based on the rubric that's in the course book. So that's our exploration of two of Freud's most prominent um, students, followers. Each one of them was predicted to be the torchbearer after Freud was gone, and neither one of them took up that torch. And that ended up, that's quite part of the grand drama of Freud's work in the early days leading up until today. So, so that's it for this week. Have a great week, and I will see you online. Take care.